Much of what we learn about science, nature, and the environment happens outside of school and beyond the walls of museums, zoos, and nature centers. I have worked as an independent environmental professional for many years and know there are others like me who interact with the public in communities worldwide. On the Talaterra podcast, we discover who these professionals are, what they do, and how they create change. Why do I focus on independent professionals? I focus on them because they move freely through communities. They move freely between schools, organizations, businesses, programs, and other informal learning environments. They are positioned to meet the public where they are, and this is powerful. Thank you for joining us today. I'm your host, Tania Marien. Hello and welcome. Today on the show, we talk about technology. Our guest today is Michael Hawk. Michael is the founder of Jumpstart Nature and the host of the Nature's Archive podcast. Jumpstart Nature is a new organization taking a tech-centric approach to connecting people with nature, natural history, and so much more. In this episode, we find out why Michael started his podcast, how he's thinking about technology and nature education, and how the AGILE approach to project management is key to what he and his team are building. Let's join the conversation. Michael, thank you so much for being on the show, and I'm very thankful that you have reached out to me to introduce me to Nature's Archive and to Jumpstart Nature and to the many really interesting things that you have planned here for Jumpstart Nature. And so I'm really looking forward to this conversation and your tech approach to environmental education and community building.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me here. I'm really looking forward to it. And when I discovered your podcast, I have to say I have a lot of catching up to do in the back catalog of your podcast. So I'm looking forward to that.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Okay. So I've read that, you've described yourself as being obsessed with photography and investigating nature and ecology. And for a long time, when I first started the podcast, for a long time, I asked guests two questions about their relationship with nature. And your enthusiasm brought these questions back up for me. And so I'd like to begin by asking you, what is your earliest memory of enjoying nature?
Oh, wow. I have maybe a synthesis of a few different memories. And in particular, I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska. And for those who are unfamiliar with Omaha, it's a medium-sized city. At the time, I think it's somewhere around 500 to 600,000 people in the metro area. And there is this really cool nature preserve called Fontanelle Forest. And my parents became members. You know, it's a low cost thing. You could go there and hike around in the woods. They had a lowland, wetland area, very diverse habitats in retrospect. I remember going there and I enjoyed the hiking and exploring. And in particular, I think it was seeing the white-tailed deer and the beavers that really stood out to me. And I really enjoyed those little journeys anyway to go visit there.
So when did nature become important to you?
Well, I had a long period where I think I deviated away from nature. I got really interested in electronics and I thought I was going to be an electrical engineer. And during my teenage years and into college, that was really my focus. However, when I took a job in California, I guess filling in a couple of blanks, I had moved to the Washington, D.C. metro area, and I took a new job in Silicon Valley. And I thought, well, this will be a lot of fun to do a cross-country road trip. And I charted out a bunch of interesting destinations. And I had an office mate who helped me with this. He was a big traveler and was pointing out maybe not so top tier locations that he thought were great. Like there were some national monuments in New Mexico, El Malpais and El Morro. And that road trip really got me reconnected with nature again. And it connected me to photography as well. I bought a camera for that road trip, and I wanted to search out interesting nature things. Usually it was landscapes to photograph. And over time, I started to realize that landscapes aren't everywhere, but birds are everywhere. So it turned into bird photography, which then led me to becoming a birder. And then when I was out birding, I started noticing other things. And this is actually at this point, I think a fairly typical progression that I think a lot of people have, starting to observe nature more broadly.
And how long after this road trip did you begin Nature's Archive?
Oh, that's a long time later. That's almost 2 decades later. So I've had this like very slow, steady progression over time. All of my vacations throughout this period were centered around national parks or interesting outdoor activities. And my interest was just slowly growing. I think maybe 10 years ago, I started thinking, you know what, maybe I should go back to school and learn about ecology. And over that time, my primary career is in data networking, and I always enjoyed the novelty and the challenge of it, but it wasn't quite ticking all the boxes for me anymore. So I started thinking that, okay, I maybe should have a second career at some point. But how do I get there? That was always the question. I was so heavily invested in my first career, and I don't have an educational background in biology or ecology or environmental sciences. So ultimately, after thinking like, what can I do? How can I get there? And kind of coming up short, I was like, well, I like talking to people one-on-one. I love to learn and I love to share. So a podcast seemed ideal. And that was the genesis of Nature's Archive. About 2.5 years ago is when I launched it.
Yes. And on this show, on your podcast, you have conversations with biologists, with researchers, and with all sorts of really interesting people who are launching different initiatives. It really feels like it's kind of like a field guide in a sense. Because you really cover a broad range of topics, and your conversations just have that field guide and that really nice feel of an interpretation. And you are at, I've forgotten the number already, but 60 some odd episodes in, 70? No, I have to look.
Yeah, pretty close to 70 now. I lose track as well because I always have 2 or 3 in various stages of production at any given time. Often I'm looking ahead and my metrics are about like what is coming. So yeah, about 70, I would say.
From all your conversations on the podcast, I get the sense that you began to observe things in the field of just natural history education and environmental education, we started noticing gaps, and you started noticing things that maybe weren't working so well. And so from what you've seen, what isn't working well in the field of environmental education?
Yeah, the podcast really helped give me perspective on what people were doing and some of the challenges out there. I also want to shout out that at the same time, I really jumped into the volunteering space as well. And that was another big piece of this. I joined the National Association for Interpretation, the NAI, and went to one of their conferences, met several people there, have been engaged with that community, the board of a local Audubon society, an open space group that's a government organization. So I've tried to get a broad spectrum of experiences at the same time. And I guess what I would say from a gap perspective, which I don't know, it's my personality. I'm not one to focus on the negatives, but I guess you asked about the gaps. So I'll focus on the negatives for a moment. So I noticed that the larger organizations tend to be stereotypically, so not always the case, but stereotypically struggling with bureaucracy is one thing. It's hard for them to try new things. And they sometimes also struggle with new technology as well. And they have some technologists, of course. I found some really good people in some of these organizations, but there's a lot of organizational inertia when it comes to trying new things. So it's hard for them to get over that hump. And the smaller organizations, they tend to be very hands-on, doing things in the community, which is amazing and exceedingly important, but it's not their mission to be able to leverage technology in the same way. And the other thing I think with the smaller organizations is very often they get caught up in the grant cycle, and it's hard for them to break out of that grant cycle to try something new. There just isn't enough leeway in their funding to take a risk like that. So that's a couple of the things that I had noticed.
Have you had an opportunity to participate in the InterpTech conference?
So no, I have not been to InterpTech.
Yeah. And so it's okay. So InterpTech happens in Asilomar out in Pacific Grove. And it is just so exciting. It's so fantastic. And everybody who's doing something with technology, they of course they present, they talk about their work, what they're doing and how they're using it in the field of interpretation. And that was where I got my first taste of virtual reality, and got to experience that. And so it's good. I would recommend that one if you get an opportunity to go. And it usually happens in April.
Okay, I will look for it.
Okay, so you did the podcast and now you are starting Jumpstart Nature. And you're taking a very tech-centric approach. And what does that mean to you?
Well, maybe to give a little context, if it makes sense to you, I could tell a little bit about what Jumpstart Nature is. And then I think that will naturally lead into the tech approach.
Yes.
So Jumpstart Nature it's a new approach, I would say, for conservation organizations. In fact, you might even call it a new operating model when you assess the landscape of these different groups. And as we started to talk about, I tried to be really methodical in figuring out what's needed and then also what's my skill set and where are those overlaps. And that, in essence, is what Jumpstart Nature intends to address. Because I really don't want to create just another conservation organization that, the same thing somebody else is doing is not going to really provide value. I might as well support that other person, whoever this other group is. So Jumpstart Nature, our mission is to catalyze everyone to make a difference for the environment. And everyone is where people sometimes get a little bit hung up. So breaking down that mission statement a little bit, as a mission statement, it's meant to be ambitious. It's something that we can always strive for. It's kind of like, to borrow the analogy, it's like the North Star. Where are we going? We're trying to catalyze everyone to make a difference for the environment. And to start off, we're not going to reach everyone. So we're going to be very focused. And that's really the goal of this mission, is for us to be intentional and deliberate about who is it we're trying to reach, and then slowly build that out over time with new offerings, new services, new approaches that can reach different people regardless of their relationship with the environment. And catalyzing, I just want to take a moment because I spent so much time picking that word, coming up with that word. And by catalyze, I'm really looking at two things. One is to initiate action, because there are a lot of people that would like to take action, but maybe they don't know how or where to start. And the other aspect of catalyze is accelerate. You think of something, a catalyst causes something to happen quickly. So if there is an audience out there who has already taken some actions, I would like to provide them support and empowerment to be able to continue on their journey to take more and more and bigger steps if they so desire. So that's my long-winded mission explanation. But I think where the tech stuff comes in is more with the strategy. So I love that. You may have heard this quote, a vision without a plan is just a hallucination. Have you heard that one?
No, I have not heard that one. That's very good.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, I can have these hand wavy, it's easy to come up with a vision that people agree with, but it's harder than to come up with a strategy to actually do it. So from a strategy standpoint, I think there are three core tenets to our strategy. And I'm going to keep you waiting for a moment. I'll cover technology as the third one, but just so you know where I'm at. I first of all, I want to be a connector. I can't stress this enough. I don't want to recreate the wheel. If somebody's doing great work out there, if it's a person or an organization, I want to funnel more people to that person or organization. So that is core to what we're trying to do. We want to be part of the community, not a silo, doing our own thing. The second big thing, I've noticed this emergence in the last decade or two of behavioral science as it relates to the environment. So in the academic space, there are a lot of people working on environmental psychology, environmental sociology, even climate specific psychology. So merging that field with some other behavioral science, I think could really be powerful to help people. I encounter so many people who say things like, what can I do? I'm just fill in the blank. I'm just an accountant. I'm just a software engineer. I'm just a grandma. I'm just one person is probably the most common one that you hear. So what can I do? And I really want to help people see and understand that we're all part of the environment and we all have a role to play. So that's where behavioral science comes in. And now to answer your question, finally, technology. So what I would say is, even though I'm in Silicon Valley, we are not inventing new climate tech or brand new technology. We're not inventors, but what we are trying to do is leverage existing technology in novel ways, in ways maybe that are novel for the conservation space. And examples of that would be things like mobile apps that I would love to talk about a vision that I have for our mobile app solution. But also things like podcasts, like we're doing right now. I think podcasts are just such a great way to reach people. They're relatively low cost. You can make them high cost if you want, but they're relatively low cost, and you can really niche down into very specific audiences and have very specific productions to reach people in a customized way. But there's also incredible opportunities in other tech spaces like gaming. That's more crystal ball for me. I would love to get into that space. I think there's a lot of opportunity there to reach entirely new demographics. So that's the types of technology. But the equally important part, maybe more important, is the tech approach. Whether we like it or not, technology is speeding up all the time. And like, for example, I've started using ChatGPT. I don't know are you familiar with ChatGPT?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So I use that as a way to brainstorm, to get ideas, to sometimes improve my writing. I'll send it my show notes for my podcast and say, please make this better. I usually give it a better prompt than that. And it's, incredibly helpful. So technology is here and it's going to permeate. I think, one of the things, back to the gaps I've seen in some of these other organizations, is taking the tech approach to how you operate the organization itself. And with this landscape of rapidly evolving technologies, things change all the time. It means that we have to operate the business differently. And I have one example that I like to use. And that's one that comes from project management, but it will apply to, I think it has applications in other spaces. And that's if you're about to do something, you're going to build something, and it could be a physical thing, a virtual thing like an app. The traditional approach would be you sit down, you say, okay, what is the thing that we want to build? And then you start reverse engineering all of the steps that are necessary to build it. And along with that, you'll sequence them out, figure out the order they need to go in, how much time each step will take, what kind of expertise is required, maybe how much money each step costs. And that's your project plan. Now, that's a very fragile project plan, because if any one thing goes wrong in that process, everything downstream of that now is potentially disrupted. And with new technologies emerging, with, say, company going bankrupt, whatever, whatever the thing is that causes that disruption, now it's a problem. So the new approach, the tech approach that has been adopted is more agile. And in fact, there's even a project management style called AGILE that basically the way it works, and there are different flavors of it, but the way it works is you still have to define where you're going and some milestones along that process, but then you build in an assumption of replanning. So you assume that maybe your users are going to want to do things differently than you first thought when you were at that table planning everything out. You assume something's going to go wrong. You assume you're going to learn in the process. So then you end up chunking that planning into smaller increments, like 2-week or 4-week increments. And at the end of those 2 or 4 weeks, you replan. And that allows you then to continually learn as you go and adjust as the landscape changes. And there are several other examples. I don't want to necessarily bore you with the inside details, but that's one good example, I think, of a tech approach.
Yes, and no, you wouldn't bore me about the details because I've worked with people and follow that type of an approach as well. And so with different projects that I'm involved in. And so, yeah, it's really, it makes for very collaborative. It's just a really nice collaborative environment. And, no one is afraid to, or I should say, everyone is comfortable embracing uncertainty. And that really moves a project forward.
That's an excellent point, actually. Yeah, because in a traditional waterfall approach, where that's the top-down approach that I was explaining at the beginning, you become really invested in that project plan. And it can cause you to make some bad decisions because you don't want to have that impact. You maybe will ignore a problem longer than you should because you know of the downstream effects it's going to have on the project plan. And you totally diffuse that situation with Agile. You're just, it's built in, and people are going to be much more honest and open about the challenges that they're encountering because the impact is only 2 weeks or 4 weeks. So yeah, I totally agree with that.
So I'm hearing from what I've read about your app, I'm hearing that your app you're designing it to address people's personal interests. As you've explained it, I heard you're explaining it. You're addressing their identity related motivations, all their own personal motivations, the reasons for engaging with nature in whatever way they choose to engage with nature. Can you offer some insight into how your app will work and how you will engage people in the app?
I appreciate your characterization of it because I want to be clear and transparent that the app does not exist yet. It's entirely in planning stage. So Jumpstart Nature, just again, for full transparency, we're very early on in this process. So I'm still recruiting volunteers, and I'm super excited. I'm about to onboard several new volunteers. So I had 4, and then we're going to probably triple that over the next couple of weeks. And, part of that now is going to be taking this to the actual proof of concept phase. So we'll actually we'll move beyond some user journeys and storyboards and actually start developing something soon. But as far as what the vision for the app is, you're exactly right. It's designed to empower users on a personalized journey to help the environment. And these words are all kind of loaded terms, nature, the environment, but I want to take a very broad definition of those. So the way it would work is if a user opens up the app for the first time, they would be presented with some lightweight onboarding questions. The app would really want to understand, why did the user come here in the first place? Are they concerned about climate change, carbon footprint, biodiversity loss, pollinators? Like there's pollution. There's a whole array of reasons why somebody might want to take a first step. So it would be important for the app to understand that. And maybe the person doesn't exactly know. They may not have defined in their own mind exactly what it is they want to focus on. So I'd want the onboarding to help with that. And the other thing that it would do is help to identify what resources are are available to this person. Maybe they have an expertise already. Perhaps, they can contribute this, their own personal knowledge in some way. Maybe they have time or money. Maybe they don't have any of that. And that's a big market. Like I want to find people who think they don't have time. And I'll leave that as a teaser for a moment because, I think, everybody can do something, even if you don't have time, money, or expertise. But then from there, it would offer options, so there would be on the back end, different user journeys that are defined. And optionality is really important to people. And as good as the app gets in understanding what is it that a user wants to do and what type of environmental identity they're willing to take on, there's always going to be some variance. So different options for the first step would be provided, and they could select from that or dismiss it and say, this isn't what I want. And of course the app could be smart enough to ask a follow-up question if it confuses, the process. So that's the initial engagement anyway.
Wow. And so this directory of resources would be built into the app. I know it's too early to know, direct people to your website, because your website is building up nicely, and lots of resources already there and articles, and then of course links to Nature's Archive and all those conversations.
Yeah, maybe it would make sense then to walk through an example. One, I'm just going to pick one. So one that comes to mind would be somebody who wants to help pollinators. I think that has captured the attention of a lot of folks, and that might be a first step into doing something for the environment. So if through the onboarding we find out somebody wants to help pollinators and they have a property that they manage, it could be their own property or maybe a community garden or, who knows what it is, then we could offer them suggestions for native plants that would support local pollinators. Now, suggesting a plant implies that they've identified that they can spend a little bit of money anyway. But to take the friction away from that, I don't want to recreate lists of suitable native plants or become a retail nursery and sell them the plant directly. So this is, it's implied I would be a connector at this point. The app would be a connector and say, here's where you can go, and here's a couple of options based on our partnership, for example, with an organization that does know the native plants that you'd want to plant. And I'll just take another branch on that real quick to give an idea. When I was saying that you don't have to have time or money or expertise to help the environment. So if somebody says that, but they still want to help pollinators, well, one thing that could be offered is behavior change. So if you have a backyard and you're paying a landscaper to come and manage it, well, one of the first things you could do is change how they're managing the backyard, stop or reduce pesticide use, reduce mowing, reduce raking, different things like that. There's ways to do it that are still intentional and look nice. And, the app could help expose people to some of these ideas that would save them money or save them time. If they're doing it themselves, maybe they're the ones that are going out and spraying pesticides or applying, inorganic fertilizers or things like that. So it could save them time too. It could give them time back.
Yep, those are great examples. Supporting people who interact with the app is a daily podcast that I see that you're also planning. And so this one would be called Jumpstart Nature. You would publish it more frequently than you do Nature's Archives right now. And so might people expect from Jumpstart Nature's daily podcast?
This is one of the things I'm really excited about because we have an opportunity to build a self-reinforcing ecosystem of resources, services, inspiration, and just to to clarify, we don't have a name for the podcast yet. So we're in the late stages of picking the name. I've been calling it Jumpstart Nature Daily just as a placeholder. So that's very likely what you saw. Now, what this it's a daily short form narrative podcast. So whereas Nature's Archive is long form interview based, this is going to be, I would call it a little bit more like an NPR style, high production value narrative podcast. And the innovative approach that we're taking is every week we're going to have a theme. So an example theme might be your yard is a habitat. Now, we would spend a little bit more time coming up with a little maybe higher marketing value name than your yard is a habitat, but I think that works. It gets the point across. And every day in this short form podcast, we would hit different elements of it. And every day would be designed to induce, I call it an aha moment, where people will be surprised by some element of nature that maybe they misunderstood or weren't aware of, or is just simply amazing on its own. And this will be designed into the narrative, and we will then follow up on that with calls to action. What can you do to now leverage this new amazing piece of information that you learned through the story to make a difference? And even if somebody doesn't follow the call to action, I hope that it serves to be a memorable educational experience for them, because there's so much amazement and magic in nature. I think there's a lot of potential power here.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, that's a really nice format. Will it launch this year? Do you have an idea about when it will launch?
Yeah, I think I'm going through the typical entrepreneurial process. Yeah, yeah, I can tell you can tell. So I was very optimistic about doing it real fast. I still think, it will certainly launch this year. I'm confident in that. I know, famous last words, going out on the limb and saying I'm confident in that. But I still hope it will launch before the end of summer. And the reason why I delayed it a little bit is I'm all about scaling. One of the things with the tech approach is I don't want to embark on something until I know I can do it consistently. And I realized to reach the quality that I wanted to reach with this podcast, I needed more help. I needed more volunteers. I needed, more planning time. And that's all coming into place right now. So I'm onboarding some of these people. I have some professional podcast producers now part of the team. And with that, I'm very optimistic that we're going to start executing at the pace that I wanted to. So just to tell you where we're at, we're deep in the development stage and just starting production. So some of the interviews are being done, and we want to have a nice catalog built up before we launch. I don't want to launch with just 1 week of episodes. I want to have several weeks of episodes so that there's buffer in that process.
Mm-hmm. Yep, makes perfect sense, especially for a show that is so involved and is linked to so many other aspects of the ecosystem that you're building.
Right.
Yeah, that whole product. Yeah, absolutely makes perfect sense. What do you want people to know about Jumpstart Nature, about Nature's Archives, and where you are in the process? I know you have an email list and you are gathering people's interest that way. How else can they interact with you at this stage in your development process?
Yeah, I think, that's a great question. And to my longtime listeners and subscribers on Nature's Archive, introducing Jumpstart Nature to the mix has probably been a little bit confusing. So I'll lay that out here real quick. Nature's Archive is now part of Jumpstart Nature, and I'm going to continue to do it. I'm going to continue to create these podcast episodes for those who already are very interested in nature. And hopefully it continues to provide value for people. So that's one way to engage with me, is to check out Nature's Archive if you want to learn about everything from slime molds to fungi to how to organize a bioblitz. Like those are the sorts of things that we talk about. And in fact, it gets broader. I've had guests talk about environmental justice, snowflake genesis. So it's nature in all of its forms, is what I like to say. And that will continue to be a core piece. For Jumpstart Nature itself, we just recently launched our social media presence. So the goal of our social media right now is really to provide moments of inspiration and some of these first steps that people can take. And I admit it's pretty basic. Our social media production is pretty basic right now, but we intend to continue to improve that and become more nuanced in that approach. We're about to launch our newsletter. So the newsletter is coming in April, and people can subscribe to that. And the goal with our newsletter is, again, to empower people on this journey. So we're going to provide quick tips and also links to useful, I'll call it educational materials, but these could be documentaries, other websites, other podcasts, things that we feel really speak to the audience. And all of this, of course, we're going to continually get feedback from and improve. So those are two ways to engage right now with what we're doing.
Oh, wonderful. Well, yeah, thank you. And I will absolutely include all of the links and your social media handles and all that in the show notes, so people can find you easily and connect with you where they live on the web. So you've got a lot of things going on. You've done a lot of really good teaching through Nature's Archive, which is, like I said, there's really good, interesting conversations with all sorts of different people, all sorts of different topics. And you're busy working on Jumpstart Nature, a new app. You're building a team. You are building up your social media presence. What's next for you?
The way I see things panning out over the next few months, and I'm going to go back to one of the things I've said a few times now, and that's I don't want to recreate the wheel in as many ways as possible. That's almost a double negative. But what I'm trying to say is, as we build this organization, I want to find partners that are synergistic in different ways. I'm not closing myself off to the idea of actually having a deeper partnership with existing environmental organizations that have a similar vision. So I'm really working to solidify the organizational structure to make it last, whether it's through partnership, whether it's through funding. Those are the most important things to make sure that this is a stable operation. So we're still in that very early stage where, we have really good momentum right now, but I can't say for sure where we're going to be next year. So I need to make sure that that's my focus.
Do you have any conference presentations planned or anything like that?
I'm going to be presenting at the CNPS Wildflower Show at West Valley College in the Bay Area.
CNPS is the acronym for the California Native Plant Society.
So that would be an opportunity for people to come out and see me in person and join us on a BioBlitz.
Oh, fun. And when will that happen?
So that is on April 22nd, Saturday, April 22nd. And the presentation that I'm giving is really about technology as a tool to help people learn more about the environment. So we're going to be looking at things like iNaturalist and Merlin and some other really interesting tools that exist now that can augment our experience out in nature.
Will some of this conference be open to the public?
Yeah, it's entirely open to the public. I don't know if there's a fee or not. I don't think there's a fee. I think it's free. And there's a variety of speakers at the Wildflower Show. So it's a good time. There's some vendors there as well. A lot of good groups that participate in that.
Is there anything that you'd like listeners to know about your projects that we haven't discussed yet?
Yeah, I think I've hit on most of the key elements. I tend to be a very strategic thinker, and I want all the pieces to fit together. I'm also multidisciplinary, and I think there's pros and cons to that. So as I build out Jumpstart Nature, I'm trying to find counterbalances to some of these behaviors of mine so that we don't go too far down a rabbit hole. So I'm really trying to be very thoughtful in how we build out the organization so it will scale. I have a vision that, some years down the road, 3 to 5 years down the road, we'll have, for example, a gaming arm and a media arm and a podcasting department. And I'm really looking for this to be something where we can reach people in many, many different facets of their life and help them at different levels, not just say, well, you can go do this, you can go, plant a plant. No, it's deeper than that. Really helping people understand, the ebbs and flows of the environment and how we fit and why it's important to be an active participant in the environment and not passively sit by and assume someone else is taking care of it for us. So that's my vision. That's what I hope to see.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Michael Hawk. To learn more about Jumpstart Nature and other resources mentioned in this episode, visit the show notes for information and links. And if you're in the Bay Area, consider joining Michael at the Wildflower Show by the California Native Plant Society on Saturday, April 22nd, 2023. The event and parking are free. Michael's session about technology and community science begins at 11:30 a.m. You can find a link to the event and the full schedule in the show notes. Thank you for joining us today. See you next time.